Let's move on to actually the second section of the book, and that deals with law and order. And again, all the stuff that we've been talking about before does feed into this. The fear of false accusations, all of this sort of leads into this. But let's dig into the law and order aspect, because there's a lot of different places where that happens. Like, obviously, I guess let's start with the one that most people think is the proper way that a proper woman, if she's allegedly raped, is supposed to do, which is immediately go to the police. Let's talk about the problems with police forces, because again, the way a lot of police forces act, and again, it's not all police forces, but a lot of them, it's very problematic.
Again, it's a complicated and I could give you a very, very lengthy answer there. But starting with the report, there's a tendency to shift to investigating the victim. Where someone who comes in and says, I was mugged, there's a presumption that they're telling the truth, that they're not just wasting your time. But if you come in and say you were raped, then it's immediately like, okay, well, I need, we're going to need more evidence than that, basically. So that whole thing. And then, again, something that I didn't realize until I started researching this was police attitudes towards rape victims are unreal. And I mean, again, obviously it's not it probably is just about every police force, although it's clearly not every police officer and police detective on those forces. But alarmingly high numbers of assuming that whether a rape victim is telling the truth is like a 50-50 chance, or even higher than 50-50, when in reality the real number of false reports, based on the best studies that we have, puts the number somewhere between 2 and 8%. And so no matter how you slice it, more than 90% of these reports are true, but officers are treating them as if, at best, it's a 50-50 chance that a woman who comes in and says she was raped is lying. That is a huge problem. Then there's the prosecution. There's the whole issue of the he said, she said, right? Or, which, again, I just want to emphasize, it's not always he and she. But if there's no physical evidence, and it's hard to say what the physical evidence is, because if there's semen, then that's, then it could be consensual. And if, so basically there has to be bruising or tearing or something, which there frequently isn't. And again, it's what we expect, what we think a rape should look like versus what it actually looks like. And again, that goes with the victim behavior, where you expect that someone who's been raped will immediately want to go to the police and have it, dealt with, and go and get a rape kit at the hospital and yada, yada, yada. Whereas lots of victims just want to, they want it to go away. They don't want to deal with it right away. So lots of victims will wait longer than we tend to think is appropriate to report, if they ever do report. They will have, the typical thing that you see on Law and Order, like they'll shower away the evidence. And obviously, if they wait a long time to report, it's all going to be gone. And so then all of that, and also another thing that comes up is that victim stories tend to not always be consistent, or they'll fudge certain little details, like, they don't want to admit that they were drinking. They don't want to admit that they were doing drugs. They don't want to admit that they were somewhere they weren't supposed to be at that time. So they'll leave that out of their initial report. And then later, when it comes out that they lied about that, then that's used to completely undermine their credibility. When in fact it has nothing to do with their account of the rape, which typically does remain consistent. But just, if you can catch a victim in any lie about any subject, then you can't possibly believe her about the rape. So that's a huge part of it. And then if it even gets as far as a prosecution, then you also have to deal with judges and juries, which I talk about in the book as well, where we all exist in the same rape culture. We all get the same messages about the way women and victims are supposed to behave, about what a real rapist looks like and what a real rape scenario is. And so you have situations where juries don't know what rape is, or judges blame the victim. I talk in the book about someone who was a juror on the rape cops case in New York, where these two officers picked up a very, very drunk woman, escorted her home, and then went back to her house multiple times, and she accused one of them of raping her while the other one was in another room. And he said, no, he cuddled with her and sang to her, but didn't rape her. And so the jury decided to acquit them, both of the officers, and one of them, the woman's specific account was that she was sort of in and out of consciousness, and she woke up being raped. And the jury, this juror's account of it, I'm sorry, I forget his name, it's Patrick something, but it was originally published on Gawker, and then it was an ebook. He tells the story of being in the jury room with this other woman who kept saying, but she woke up with him penetrating her, and him saying, but you know that not all sex is non-consensual, right? And he basically bullies this woman into admitting oh, okay, maybe she consented, and completely glosses over the fact that she was asleep at first, which means she can't consent. Right. I can't believe I didn't mention that when you asked me before about things that people don't think are rape, because that's one of the biggest, and it's something that comes up in pop culture, and something I talk about a lot. And even in cases it's one of the things that Julian Assange is accused of, is putting your dick in a sleeping person, which is rape, because a sleeping person cannot consent to sex, even if that's someone you have a prior sexual relationship with. Yeah. And that's one that really trips people up. For some reason, it seems so obvious to me that if the person isn't awake, they're not consenting.
It seems pretty obvious, but apparently it's not.
It's apparently not. So that's something that, and so this guy writes, and kind of casts himself as the hero in this drama, because he bullies this woman into shutting up about the fact that the woman says she woke up with this man's penis inside her. And it's just mind-blowing to me that that's what we have to deal with here in terms of the legal system. And then, of course, I should also mention that, let's say you do get a conviction, then the person goes to prison, which is where men are most at risk of being raped themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's, people like to joke about that or talk like rapists deserve it, but I think, we have to fundamentally start from a position where no one deserves rape. And that is just a whole other issue with our prison system being so incredibly messed up. So on the one hand, I want to see more rapists face consequences. On the other hand, I'm very conflicted about, frankly, sending anyone to prison in American society with the way that it operates. So there are a lot of problems there that need fixing, that apart from simply victims need to be believed throughout the process, and they need to have support rather than suspicion coming at them.